welcome to the Webster Tarpley program, this week's edition here on Unbound Radio. And our theme today is going to be basically one thing. It is to attempt to read in the light of the current Bilderberg proceedings going on or about to begin in England, near London, actually not far from Heathrow Airport, which is why they do it at that point, to try to see what we can tell about the mood in the world financier ruling class. And remember, this is, so to speak, the enemies. The governments of the world are controlled by these oligarchs, these neo-feudal financiers and their various hangers-on. And we'll talk a little bit about Bilderberg lore in a minute, but we've got to cut through a lot of garbage, because the fact that Bilderberg is a secret proceeding, that it's not open to the public, that it's not like Davos or something like this, where you can get an idea of what's going on and go in and interview people and be part of the lectures. It is therefore possible for people from the outside to project all manner of idiocy onto what is going on the inside. And of course, our dear friends, the libertarian reactionaries, that is to say, reactionaries, and in some cases, I'm afraid, neo-fascists, who disguise themselves as libertarians, can project every garbage that they want onto those proceedings. And what they've done is make up a terrific mythology. Now, unfortunately, you know my motto, de mortuis nihil nisi bonum. We don't want to talk badly about the dead, but unfortunately we have to. This character, Tucker, the correspondent of the American Free Press, if that's what they really call it these days, the Liberty Lobby, the Roosevelt haters, those who were soft on fascism in the 30s and have continued to be, in my view. Tucker was somebody who claimed to get telephone calls from the inside. He claimed to get all kinds of secret reports and everything. And having viewed him up close as he operated at as kind of a diner, an alfresco diner last May, June there in Chantilly, Virginia, and you can see this, it's up on the internet. It was clear to me that he was simply inventing things, that he made this stuff up. And he said, they're all in favor of Obama, and they don't like free enterprise, and they don't want, they love big government and all this other stuff. Absolutely primitive garbage. But he could claim that he was getting it. At one point he said, inside the meeting, they're cursing the name of Ron Paul. Cursing the name of Ron Paul. Well, inside the meeting, there was Peter Thiel, the anarcho-capitalist, right? The ultra-reactionary, neo-fascist, what can we call him? Peter Thiel, big money bags. He was cursing Ron Paul so much that he gave $3.9 million to Ron Paul's PAC, right? The PAC that was dedicated, super PAC probably by this point, that was dedicated to advancing the electoral fortunes of Ron Paul, and as I warned you all last cycle, Rand Paul, little Rand, the nepotist, who was the beneficiary of that entire thing, right? And this is the southern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite Freemasonry. These are the neo-Confederates. These are the racists. This is basically Strom Thurmond, Jesse Helms, and Trent Lott with a slightly different visage put on. So, a couple of comments in just a minute. Welcome back to the Webster Tarpley program. Talking about Bilderberg and the need to cut through a cloud of absolute disinformation and really vulgar, stupid misreporting. This character Tucker, therefore, said that inside the Bilderberg meeting, his sources said that the name of Ron Paul was being cursed. And I wondered, could that be Peter Thiel, who was giving him almost $4 million through his super PAC to spread this ideological poison of Paul-tardism or the pallbearers? No, I thought this is probably the waitstaff in the kitchen who are cursing the name of Ron Paul when they find out that he wants to take away their union, take away their minimum wage, take away their Social Security pension, take away their food stamps, strip their kids of Head Start so they get a breakfast in the morning, strip their pregnant wives of WIC and other things. All of that was included in Ron Paul's Restore America budget. So, again, watch out for absolute disinformation, and especially if it's tending to glorify the libertarian view of the world, then you really have to watch out. But let's get right to the heart of the matter, right? Armed now with this healthy skepticism. What is the situation? We have to understand last year, the Bilderberg group came out for Romney. They essentially placed their bet on Romney. Now, this is interesting in many ways. Charlie Skelton, my esteemed colleague and a fine person who is not dealing in any of what I've just said, but is actually an honest reporter with a certain degree of political, a significant degree of political sophistication. It was Charlie Skelton who reported based on 4 sources that Bishop Mitt Romney, the would-be dictator of the United States, had gotten his way into the Bilderberg meeting in Chantilly, not Obama. And my reading had been, before that and independent of that this group was in favor of Romney, that they wanted a permanent austerity dictatorship ruled by Romney, in which lots of people would be excluded from the franchise, and that would be enforced by fascist judges packing the Supreme Court. There would be a general destruction of unions on the model of Hitler and Mussolini. And since, of course, this would be done through states like Snyder or Walker, if you had the Supreme Court packed with fascist judges, then, of course, libertarian judges is what we call them today, then there'd be very little that could be done about that, right? Short of the mass strike writ large, which is always there. And we want to always remember it. But it would then become a much, much more difficult thing. And it probably means several decades of fascist rule and Chinese world domination. Because remember, that's also the inevitable consequence of these reactionary libertarian policies. Always add in the expense of learning Chinese so you can follow orders when this happens. Okay, last year, the Bilderberg supported Romney. And if you can't figure that out, we have some articles here. I think one of them that I just reported on my Twitter feed, right, the distinguished Webster G. Tarpley, is that Romney beat Obama in Wall Street contributions by 38 to 5. 38 to 5. I guess that could be a football score. Probably very hard to imagine that as a baseball score, although possible. But 38 to 5, rather one-sided, wouldn't you say? Romney got 700 to 800% more than Romney out of Wall Street. Does that mean anything to you out there, oh benighted dwellers in the libertarian outer darkness? And there are not that many of you, right? Remember that Ron Paul would be lucky to get 10% in most Republican primaries, maybe 8%, and that's 8% of maybe 25% who are represented in the Republican Party. So what have we got? We're down to about 2 to 3%. This is not a revolution, believe me. This is a big fraud kept going with fake media and, above all, huge amounts of reactionary and fascist money. And, of course, what they're complaining about today is they didn't get their tax exemption fast enough, right? The Koch brothers, these reactionary billionaires, are complaining that their little grouplets and groupuscules didn't get the tax exemptions that they wanted. Boy, I'd love to have a tax exemption, but unfortunately, I'm not a social welfare organization and not likely to be accepted as one. But they somehow they can debate it, and then they can collect damages that you're going to pay for. But let's try to keep on the subject here. Last year, this was so well known. Look, one ket, the DC gossip. This is not high level analysis, but we go back to the one ket of June the 6th, 2012, article by Kirsten Boyd Johnson. Did Bilderberg monsters just crown Mitt Romney your next leader? Yes, they tried to. And as I've always pointed out, they don't always get what they want. Because there are these elections, there is this process. It can be shaped, but it's not like you gesture hypnotically and it all falls into place, which I think is the ignoramus libertarian point of view, right? That somebody is sitting in a room with buttons and they're pushing all these buttons. This is obviously wrong. It proceeds as a series of pragmatic orientations to the situation as it evolves. The Bilderberg often get their way, often, sure, but not always. And this was a case when they didn't. And then what happened? Well, then there was an attempted coup d'etat, wasn't there, dear friends, in Radio Land? There was an attempted October surprise. It came on September 11th, but October surprise is what it was. It was the Benghazi events I've talked about. I'm not going to repeat the detailed analysis. It's on tarpley.net. You can find it there. You can find it. You can see the links through the Twitter feed. But the idea was a cabal, a clique, a camarilla of generals, admirals, and other top officers attempted to orchestrate this Benghazi event with the idea of giving Obama a real embarrassing black eye and tying him up in knots during the 2 months before the election. Okay, but then after that fact, a lot of bigwigs began to get sacked and cashiered, and that would be, of course, General Petraeus, the darling of the neocons, the focus of all Bonapartist tendencies in the United States government is Petraeus. And you could say he's a failure. Yeah, Marshal Pétain was a failure. Marshal Pétain was not the savior of Verdun. Marshal Pétain was the guy who wanted to quit Verdun. He wanted to give it up. And in 1918, with the German final offensive, right, Operation Michael, Pétain wanted to essentially retreat to the Loire, forget about the liaison with the British. He was a defeatist. And with Petraeus, we have the fruit of an officer corps, which has not won a real battle since the Incheon landing back in 1951. Okay? That's the last time they won a fair fight with anybody. So this is a pretty lame excuse for an officer corps. But they're great at intrigue, right? They're, as you expect demoralized people who lose most of the time, they're big at intrigue. So the heads that rolled were Petraeus, General Carter Ham of AFRICOM, the guy who controlled the special forces in Benghazi, who controlled the Sigonella airfield 400 miles away. Could have been there very quickly. No. General Allen, the commander in Afghanistan, who has all the time for these emails with this strange woman. And then General Stavridis, the NATO commander, also a big, important guy. And don't forget Admiral Goyette, commanding that Stennis battle group out there in the Gulf, right? A guy who could have started a war, or the head of the Missile Defense Organization, or others, right? And I've published all the names. And this, of course, extended then to people like Senator DeMint, the neocon paymaster, right? The paymaster for the Koch brothers. It extended into the top of the military-industrial complex, the head of Lockheed, the biggest single defense contractor most years, and the Gallup poll. So essentially you'd have to say, last November, under the cover of the election, and that's important because that makes it much easier when there's an election, there was an attempt by this clique of generals, including the CIA, emphatically including the CIA, because that's where Petraeus was operating. That was the personal union, as they used to say in monarchical times. The union of the Pentagon and the CIA was accomplished by Petraeus. Then we had the military-industrial complex, as suggested by Lockheed. We had these polling and other organizations, right? The Gallup poll that was saying that Obama was going to lose. Karl Rove, who had his machine ready to go, right? Some say a vote fraud machine rather than a get-out-the-vote machine. And the Tea Party with DeMint, and behind DeMint, you got the Koch brothers and so forth. So put Bilderberg in that group. So Bilderberg generals in CIA, military-industrial complex, Tea Party, Congress people, right? DeMint then forced out, and then Gallup and Rove, okay? So all of that, but it didn't work, right? Because there still is the real world. Now, Bilderberg is not happy. Bilderberg is not happy. They wanted Romney. They wanted to be well on the way to a permanent fascist dictatorship by now. And they also felt very strongly that if they'd gotten Romney, why, you'd already have the war in Syria. You'd be fighting in Syria. You'd be fighting in Iran, according to their view. So they're not happy. And these are people who are accustomed to command, right? They are, of course, figments of a dying empire. I'm the first one to stress that, right? They are neo-feudal interests. They are neotenous. In other words, they get more power as the society loses power and tends to collapse. So that neoteny occurs, and that's what they represent. So what are they doing now? Well, let's just see if we can work this in before the next station break here. Let me see if I find my text. I want to give this to you straight. Here's how it's seen by Obama. This is a publication called Mondo Weiss, Philip Weiss. Obama told friends he reneged on progressive promises out of fear of assassination, says Ray McGovern. Now, Ray McGovern is a serious person. I've had all kinds of differences with him. We won't go into those now. But this is not some fly-by-night kook who comes out of nowhere, right? He was the briefer for George H.W. Bush. So, Obama has abandoned progressive principles such as stopping drone attacks and shutting down Guantanamo because he is afraid of being assassinated, telling friends, don't you remember what happened to Martin Luther King Jr.? Retired CIA analyst Ray McGovern said today. So it's second-hand, third-hand, but I think this speaks with a certain authority. It makes sense within my overall intelligence picture, and that's how you do it. Obama's afraid of what happened to Martin Luther King, and Ray McGovern says, I know from a good friend who was there when it happened, so it's at least one remove, that at a small dinner with progressive supporters, after these progressive supporters were banging on Obama before the elections, why don't you do the things we thought you stood for? Obama turned sharply and said, don't you remember what happened to Martin Luther King? That's a quote and a very revealing quote. So McGovern says this on WBAI Law and Order on a recent morning. And McGovern had been calling Obama a wuss. Yeah, fine. I would say Wall Street puppet, but as those 37 or 38-5 scores show, it's a Wall Street puppet who has been basically abandoned by the people up there because he can't deliver what they want. He does not want to deliver the Syrian war. Even a libertarian should be able to figure that out. Obama says no war with Syria, no war with Iran. War means the big stuff. Heavy-duty bombing, boots on the ground, ground divisions. He doesn't want it. He says, yeah, drones. He says, yeah, cyber war. Yeah, destabilization. Yeah, assassinations, right? The entire array, I've gone through it, right? The divine plan of the CIA. Drones, special forces, bombing, and all the rest of it. But there's a reticence on the part of Obama. Can't you see that? There is no war with Syria yet. It hasn't happened. So there are people who want it to happen. And there's an urgency now. Because if it doesn't happen soon, those death squads are going to be annihilated. They are going to be exterminated. Now, this, of course, for the world, this would be a boon, I must say. But for the people who regard those death squads as their pawns, their chess pieces on the World Historical Scoreboard, they are not happy with that. They don't want those death squads to be wiped out. So we got to figure that there's an urgency that they feel. And let me add, if I can, before this next break here. We'll get to this in the next break in just a second. Welcome back to the Webster Tarpley program here on Unbound Radio. So let's continue this analysis. The ruling class represented at Bilderberg is not happy. They wanted Romney. Get that through your thick head. They wanted Romney. They didn't want Obama because they say Obama's austerity is too slow. It's not genocidal enough. The primitive accumulation they require goes far beyond what Obama can offer with his, essentially indirect methods. And they want the attack on Syria. They want the attack on Iran. And in addition to wanting it, they now need it more than they ever did, because if they don't act soon, that entire pool of jihadis, a whole generation of the most extreme jihadis and killers that have been attracted into Syria are going to be exterminated. They are being pocketed, right? This is what the the encirclement battles of World War II, right? The famous the envelopment, right, leading to a pocket, the Kesselschlacht. The Kessel is that round, that place where you get pinned in, right? And then your supplies are cut off, and then you're going to be wiped out. That is what is happening to the death squads at a place like Qusair. So they've got to do something about that. And they're screaming to Obama. Here's another side of it, too. You look at the reactionaries on the domestic front. They are screaming about Obamacare, 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 as if this actually were the end of the world. Now, of course, this was Romney vintage, vintage 2002 or something like this. Right? It's a Republican plan. It's a private sector plan. It's actually a bailout for insurance companies that have bankrupted themselves with derivative speculation. What in God's name can explain this Republican hysteria around Obamacare? It is, I think, this. They don't want the American people to get the idea that there's a right to health care. Because the message of Obamacare, as received by the average person, right? Forget about all the sophisticated nuances that an analyst or some kind of an insider would know. The average person says, hey, as of the end of this year, beginning of next year, I can get insurance for everybody in my family, even the ones with the pre-existing conditions that I couldn't do anything for. So a lot of people have been building their planning around that, right? And this is going on relatively silently because they don't talk about it. Once the American people get an idea that they have a right to health care at any age, not just above 65, those reactionaries have undergone a big defeat. Remember, the Franklin D. Roosevelt Economic Bill of Rights, the thing that the American GI fought for, the thing that those GIs won by defeating Nazi fascism on the battlefield, and that they have bequeathed to us, our economic rights. All those people who got killed on the beach at Iwo Jima or in the December snows of the Ardennes, Battle of the Bulge, and everything else. We have got to be stewards of what they have left us, our economic rights, and one of them is the right to health care. Remember, Roosevelt said you got a right to a job, a right to a home, a right to health care and old age insurance. If you're a businessman, you have a right to be free of monopoly competition, such as Walmart. If you're a farmer, you have the right to a parity price for what you're producing, and you've got freedom from the four freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from fear, freedom from want. And the want one is the one that where the U.S. has fallen short so far. So I think that's the fear. And now what do we get? Obama thinks his life is in danger. I would regard this, frankly, as an authoritative report. I think that Ray McGovern, even though I don't agree with him, and he is from the CIA, and he may, to some degree, still be speaking for the CIA. What do we know? Is telling us that Obama is afraid. Why would he do it? He says, he tells you this incident. So here's what what Ray McGovern says. He says, I've always been shocked that when he came into office, he didn't prosecute the torturers, the kidnappers. How about the bankers, Ray? But anyway, he says, I'm convinced, Ray McGovern now, I'm convinced that the president of the United States is afraid of the CIA. That's why he put John Brennan in place, right now, the head of the CIA. He thinks John Brennan owes more personal loyalty to him than all those other thugs out there who did the torture and so forth. And that's questionable. If you go back to my books, Obama, the Postmodern Coup, The Making of a Manchurian Candidate, and Barack H. Obama, The Unauthorized Biography, in the latter of those two, BHO, The Unauthorized, I compare him to Septimius Severus, and I say, look, how is Obama ever going to command the loyalty of the officer corps? Septimius did it with money, starting the hyperinflation. But in this case with Obama, I don't think he's ever won the loyalty of the officer corps. Think of a crystal. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to the Webster Tarpley program. So we're just summing up. The issue of the loyalty of the officer corps to the Constitution is very much an open issue. This has come to a head as a result of the Depression and also the animus that many of them feel against Obama, right? Officer corps heavily drawn from the South. Racist attitudes certainly not unheard of. in those areas, and then the political dimension, right? The spread of libertarianism and other subversive views among the officer corps. What McChrystal, you remember old Stanley McChrystal with his choice words for the elected heads of the civilian government, whatever you want to say. I think you got to figure a lot of generals think the way that McChrystal did, and his sidekick or his friend Petraeus is probably one of them. And we'd then have to go and ask people like Carter Ham and Stavridis and Allen, and Goyette, and the other ones. A lot of them have been sacked, but there are lots more. That was just cutting off the some of the most obvious ones. So there was this problem, right? And as I said at the end of the previous segment, when I was writing Barack H. Obama, the unauthorized biography, you compare this to the coming of Septimius Severus in the Roman Empire. He also had trouble getting the loyalty of the Roman legions, and he did it with money. He chose to buy their loyalty, and he's credited or blamed by some analysts of starting the actual hyperinflation that marked the final phases of the Roman Empire, the last 100 years or so. Obama has not done that, right, because of budget constraints, if nothing else. He's not been able to give money rewards to these generals and so forth. And because also of the budget constraints, he's had to wind down the wars. Also because this is his policy, right? This is what Obama represents. And again, I say to these loudmouth libertarians, right? Deal with the fact. Tell me how Obama is clearly not at war in the sense that we know, right? The real war, the big war, the guerre, engagée. This is not what we have in Syria, not what we have in Iran. There are powerful forces who want this, and Obama's not giving them what they want. How do you fit that into your stupid equation? And then with those death squads, those are the assets they had. That's what they used in Libya. If they want to go on to Turkey, they're going to have to transfer them back there, and so forth. So if Assad and Hezbollah and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard are able to wipe out significant parts of this death squad population, this death squad pool, won't that be, in some ways, a strategic defeat for the imperialists? And I would then also add in, the thing that they're concerned about with Obamacare, very little to do with the details of Obamacare, quite a few of which are very bad, as I've never hidden. It's the idea that you have a right to health care, and that if you need health care, you have a right to go to the government and demand it. This is what the reactionaries hate and fear. And that is, I think, the root of their hysteria, right? Along with other causes of hysteria. So I would urge people, if you want to be a positive force in history, do not get caught up in the stupidity and bankruptcy of the Republican talking points on this. We're not interested in Benghazi because we know what you have to do about Benghazi. We're not interested in the Republican hearings. You want to know why those people got killed? Ask Petraeus, ask Carter Ham, ask Stavridis, ask a couple of others, and you'll be on your way. And they're not going to do that. That's exactly the opposite of what they want, despite an attempt by the Washington Post to redirect this thing against Petraeus. What has changed, of course, is the attitude of the ruling elite itself, right? They tried to install Romney under the cover of an election. They failed, and after that, they had to back off. And they've now waited, right? They've given a decent interval, as they say, and now they begin their operations once again. And you can see the news media that were not interested in this scandal, right? Not just Fox, but now CBS, Cheryl Atkinson, Jonathan Karl, ABC. They're falling all over themselves to be the first with the new big lie from the reactionary and fascistoid Republicans. Now, in the middle of all this, Petraeus goes to the Bilderberg conference. This is the number one fact. Petraeus attends Bilderberg this season. And some people, one guy wrote back to me saying, oh, he's a has-been. Yeah, he's a never was. In terms of winning battles, he's like Pétain. He's a loser. But that is not the measure, right? He is supposedly the leading military figure of his generation. So Petraeus is going, And his new employer is going, Henry Kravis of KKR, Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, right? The guy who wrote the biggest check in world history, $28 billion for RJR Nabisco back in the early 80s. And if you look at my Bush book, you'll see that there's a family alliance between Kravis's father and Prescott Bush. So this is a significant force, Henry Kravis, and his wife or his, I don't know what, but Madame Kravis or Mademoiselle Kravis of the Hudson Institute is also there. And we've got 6 Turks, indicating that it seems to me that they've decided that Erdogan can be overthrown. That is not a very clear-cut one, though, because you can see the U.S. media are hyping the destabilization, but there are authentic and inauthentic elements. In other words, the park is obviously a big nothing. The presence of the death squads in Syria and the gas and the kidnappings and the bombings they bring with them, that's serious. So that has to be balanced. But remember, the whole goal of playing Turkey against Syria was to destroy both. And there would be some people who say, well, if we can't destroy Syria, at least let's destroy Turkey. Certainly a lot of finance oligarchs, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Osborne, his shadow counterpart, Ed Balls, Madame Lagarde, a.k.a. Lagarce of the IMF, always one step away from indictment. Bullet Bob Rubin of Citibank and Goldman Sachs, right? The dominant figure of the late Clinton administration. The darling of LaRouche, then, I think, and now. Tim Geithner, more recent, of the Federal Reserve and the Treasury. Barroso, the neo-fascist of the European Commission. Barclays Bank, and so forth. And then, again, I can't, if we read the article by the British Observer, Stephen Watson, another notable attendee is Peter Thiel, the man who provided financial muscle for online ventures like Facebook and PayPal, as well as LinkedIn and Friendster. Yeah, and who gave $4 million to your candidate, Ron Paul. How about that? Why don't you put that in there? Would that jiggle your outlook a little bit too much? And Petraeus. Petraeus, his boss Kravis, or his employer. I guess it's a way to make Petraeus rich in the short term so that he'll have that taken care of. And, of course, the people from Barclays, from Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation, big money laundering operation, Goldman Sachs, TD Ameritrade, they're all there. The now ex-queen, I think, of Holland is there, and the Dutch Prime Minister, and on and on and on, Shell, British Petroleum, and so forth. But again, I think the sinister feature of this, the most sinister feature, is the presence of Petraeus. So my question for Bilderberg, are you organizing a coup in the United States for this year? Not under the cover of an election. See, when you have an election, it becomes easier. That's the great time for a coup. Project Democracy figured that out, right, with their color revolutions, right? Rose's revolution, Orange Revolution, Cedars, sometimes they win, sometimes they lose, but they generally try to do it connected to an election. So an election is actually an occasion for a coup. That is what Project Democracy has done to these poor voters around the world. But now, if they want to do it now, if they want Obama, they can Watergate him out. They can do other things. Now let's look. If you've been watching, the trailers on the TV and just keeping your eyes open, you'll see we now have a rash of movies that try to accredit the meme of an armed attack on the White House. Yes, an armed attack, commando attack on the White House, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington, D.C. A couple of months ago, we had one called Olympus Has Fallen, and this was quite graphic, right? They had big trucks loaded with commandos coming in Pennsylvania Avenue, getting in front of Lafayette Park, crossing onto the White House side, crashing through the fence, and the commandos run to attack the White House. That was called Olympus Has Fallen. Now we've got another one called White House Down, even more explicit. Commando attack on the White House. That's 2. And then we've got World War Z. This is Brad Pitt, I guess. And this is mainly zombies, but I think there are some scenes there of the top government buildings, and I believe the White House also getting slammed. Now, we have to read this in the famous context of the Rand Corporation in Santa Monica, so close to Hollywood, the exchange of scenarios, the accreditation of memes. If we go back to the 1990s, we will see that there is a gradual accreditation of the memes that will then occur on September 11, 2001, right? The Fight Club, a leading example, right? When you see buildings come crashing down. But there were others, and there were others that were more experimental, right? The taking over of Air Force One, or the taking over of a plane that had poison gas, and all kinds of other things, which then showed up in the pre-9/11 drills. Now, suppose you're Obama and you're watching your basketball game or whatever you're watching on ESPN, and then on comes the trailer for White House Down or Olympus Has Fallen or World War Z. This obviously is a threat. And then you turn to the local news and you find Ron Kokesh wants to bring 10,000 armed racist reactionaries to Washington, D.C. They want to have loaded rifles, and they want to cross from Virginia. They want to walk all around the National Mall. They want to go by, you know what it is, right? They go by the Mint, by the Department of Agriculture, Department of Energy, Department of Transportation, Housing and Urban Development, Health and Human Services, go by the Rayburn Building, turn north in front of the Capitol, Library of Congress, right? Then you get to the Senate office buildings. You're on the Senate side. You go back down. You go by the various Smithsonian museums, the National Gallery. Then you're going to pass by the White House and the Treasury, of course, on the way, and the FBI. And, of course, you get the idea. One division. That would be one division of presumably black-clad reactionaries, white, marching into the District of Columbia to intimidate the federal government, to intimidate the Congress, the president, the black population. Maybe I'll feel a little bit of strike breaking on the side, who knows? Bust up some demonstration if somebody was demonstrating for their economic rights and they decided it violated the Austrian school or the criteria of being a right-wing anarchist. They might do something about that too. So you get the general idea. So Obama can then say, my God, this looks like a scenario. Obviously, it's not necessary for the people in the Kokesh March to know why they're there. It's actually better if they don't know why they're there. But if you seed that with the proper provocateurs, you can then turn that into a first-class bloodbath, and then some general blows in, and he says, look, I have a real division here. We're going to brush these people aside, but after that, we're going to impose martial law, and who knows what happens to Obama in the process. So this is where we are now. And if you join in, as so many have, to this mindless, idiotic anti-Obama, you are blind to what may well be a coup d'etat in process, right? So now, do you believe in the Constitution, yes or no? Or was that just a lot of hot air, right? Was that just a lot of bull on your bullhorn that you were talking about the Constitution, right? I think the Constitution is worth keeping, and that means Obama won the election. You want to get him out, you better win the next election. We'll be back in a minute with a few more comments here on the Webster Tarpley program. Welcome back to the Webster Tarpley program on Unbound Radio. Now, what does this leave us with? What's the scenario? The ruling class, as exemplified by Bilderberg, and other wings of the ruling class, like the Koch brothers, don't go to Bilderberg, but they're there. The Bilderberg is one big part of it, but not the whole ballgame by any stretch. They want Obama out. Yes, they do. They want Obama out. Get that through your thick head. They want the attack on Syria. They want the attack on Iran. And they don't want you to get the idea, however distorted, that you have the right to health care. They want to fight back on all of those points. And if Obama remains in office, they are not going to be happy about any of that. So this year they don't have an election to use as the cover. They can't use October surprises, vote fraud, the sort of Karl Rove naughty stuff. So what are they going to do? They're going to have to think about either Watergate, which they prefer. Remember, they want to keep the illusion of legality, I guess we'd have to say at this point, the illusion of legality, right? They'd rather not have Olympus has fallen, White House down. Although, if we go back to 1933 in Germany, right, the burning of the Reichstag and what have you, or if we go back to France, even closer to our own circumstances, the attack on the French Chamber of Deputies, February 6, 1934, by monarchists, reactionaries, fascists, and others, that shows that when they get hysterical, when the combination of depression and loss of assets, like these death squads, is pushing them to desperate action, they're going to do just about anything. Now, what are the potentialities for Watergate? Well, in the House, you can impeach Obama anytime you want. Those lunatics in the House, they'd impeach him as soon as look at him. They'd do it at the drop of a hat. In the Senate, it's going to be difficult, but it just got easier with the death of Senator Lautenberg of New Jersey. We're now going to have Christie, the Garden State Goering, whom Obama, perhaps in his desperation, decided to make greater than he ever was. Suppose Christie puts a typical reactionary Republican into that Senate seat. That means that until October, what is this, October? Christie, there's a general election in New Jersey in November with a governor race, right? What are you trying to do? You're going to have one in October and then one at the beginning of November? Sue him. Make him put them together. He wants low turnout for the Senate so that the Republicans can keep the seat. You can see what's coming. And that's what the White House should be talking about. You get the idea, right? All these idiotic scandals, Benghazi, IRS, James Rosen. Hey, we'll talk about this another time, but you go back. Chicago Tribune, 1941. Chester Manley exposes FDR's war plans. In other words, the master war plan of the United States, Rainbow Six, I guess at that point, given by most likely General Wedemeyer to Chester Manley of the Chicago Tribune. What was the date? December 4th, 1941, 1 week before Pearl Harbor. This helped Hitler. It swept away resistance inside Germany to declaring war on the United States. That's the kind of subversive vermin that you're dealing with in the media. And you've got to understand that you think the White House is lashing out too much or other agencies are lashing out too much about journalism. You have to understand this is all taking place in a context where there's just been an attempted military coup under the cover of an election, right? Which most people still haven't figured out, right? Most of our libertarian heroes have not been able to get that through their thick skulls. So this is what you have to watch out for. So don't become part of the yelping crowd of detractors who think that somehow getting rid of Obama would solve anything for them. That would throw you right into the hands of somebody like martial law administrator David Petraeus. Now, to discuss more of these things, I should have mentioned this earlier, on Sunday, January 9th, New York City at the Left Forum, the continuation of the old socialist scholars conferences of the late 60s. I'm going to be at Pace University on Sunday, the 9th of June at noon. From noon to 2, we're going to have a panel with my distinguished colleague Joe Calhoun of Denver, former and possible future congressional candidate, and Tom Kiley of INN World Report. We're going to have a panel there. Please do come and hear it. Please do come and take part. Be ample opportunity for debate there and later in the afternoon. The United Front Against Austerity will have a table there. Now, we're also continuing, obviously, the mobilization on the Elizabeth Warren and John Tierney bill, 0.075% interest rates. We just had Obama's Rose Garden event. The problem is we really don't like the Republican bill, which raises the interest rates to 8.5% as a limit. We don't like Obama's either. We want the Warren-Tierney bill and nothing less. And all you libertarian windbags out there, you want to attack the Federal Reserve, here's your chance. It's the only chance you've ever had in your lifetime. Warren is proposing to make Bernanke finance college loans for kids through the discount window. So get busy on that if you're worth anything. Otherwise, you're a fraud. And this is Webster Tarpley Wishing you all the best until next week.